sometimes sitting still is needed to contemplate things, but we can also contemplate life through movement too. And sometimes some of the best ideas I know I have, and I talk to others that feel the same, when we're moving, when we're running, when we're doing exercises, yoga, anything, climbing, hiking, good ideas come to us in that stage. So I think movement is definitely key in a lot of realms of life. It's not a bad thing, technology and having access to friends and family, especially for emergencies. But I think again, you need that balance where, use it when you need to and use it for entertainment or use it to learn skills like on YouTube. Like you said, watching YouTube, we can learn a lot of things we didn't know before. We have so much access to information, but maybe too much or over access of it is what can sometimes hurt our brain or put us into these mental state thoughts. There's these experiences are in our mind where we're like, am I sitting around too much watching this? And is that healthy for my brain? So I know for me, I think back again to high school. I remember, I was getting into smoking cigarettes, drinking with friends in Philadelphia. And I remember something clicked and I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be more productive. And I remember joining the rowing team. And by joining the rowing team, my grades went up. And just because I was so focused on one thing, it carried over to other aspects.
Hey there, folks. Sifu Slim here, coming to you live from Playa del Carmen in Mexico. And I had a really serendipitous experience today. Sometimes the rain changes everything for everyone involved. And so during my ride to the beach on a bicycle this morning, things were already moist. It had rained all last night. So I'm riding through puddles that are 4 to 5 inches deep, which is a little interesting on a bicycle because you don't know what else as you're going through, or you can hit another pothole because some of the roads where I am are a little hairy, and you don't want to wipe out in general, but you certainly don't want to wipe out in a puddle. Well, I have a backpack with some stuff that I need they're somewhat valuable, some of the things, and I have to get to the beach safely. And then there's some mosquitoes, so I have my glasses on that are kind of like Oakley razor blades, but for someone who does construction or painting or something. So I have those clear glasses on because I don't need sunglasses in case the bugs are flying and this and that. And then I get to the beach, and amazingly enough, even where there was no wind, there were no bugs at the beach. And I asked one of the gentlemen who was working at the public beach if there were any bugs, and he says, no, solamente tuve dos o tres mosquitos esta mañana. So this big, strong guy only had 2 or 3 mosquitoes. So I felt that was pretty good. He had more surface area for the mosquitoes to land than I do. So I got into my workout and then did a long swim. And then after breakfast that I had in a place down there, I got to ride home in the rain, and it cooled me off. The first time I've been cool in Mexico, where it's usually in the 80s in this tropical area in Playa del Carmen by Cancun. So over to Nate to tell us a little bit about himself, the weather, where he is, and what he's up to. Nate Dirvin, a multisport athlete, and are you an officer in the Coast Guard, Nate?
Thanks for the intro, Sifu. Yes, I am a United States Coast Guard officer, proud Coast Guard officer, a member there. Currently, to answer your other question, I am in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's it's about 20 to 30 something degrees here the last few days, so it's a bit of a cold spell. Not as cold as some of the places in the world I've encountered, but it's been quite a good wind chill here the last few days. Trying to take my son out to the playground yesterday, but it did snow yesterday as well. But it didn't stick. It's sort of been melting here and there, but yeah, that's the kind of weather we're dealing with. Quite the opposite of where you're at in Mexico.
A friend of mine in Clinton, New Jersey, said he got 10 inches yesterday. and the snow was melting because of the sun that had come out. And so that's what he was experiencing. Did you guys get any snow in Philadelphia?
So yes, we had at least a few inches when after waking up yesterday and looking out the window here and then actually going outside. Fortunately, a lot of it melted. There was still some snow in the cars, but unfortunately for my son and my nephew, we tried going to the playground here, and there was still some snow in the playground. So, and of course, it's wet, so it wasn't great conditions for them. But yeah, we did experience snows as well, but not I don't think as much as across a bridge in New Jersey there.
So you and I were talking a little bit before we got on today about some of the solace, some of the release, some of the therapeutic side of sports and movement, and sometimes extreme sports and movement. And this harkens back to a movie that made a big splash in the 1990s, which was Forrest Gump. He was in love with Ma Jenney, his neighbor growing up in the town in the South. His mom is Sally Fields, the Flying Nun, and many other famous roles. And she was not attracted to him in a boyfriend girlfriend kind of a way. She liked him, trusted him, cared for him. But in the 60s, and she's portrayed in the movie as, getting on a different wavelength and going off with, the flower children, the concert goers, the people that lived with, minimalism and freedom and drugs and ecstatic dancing and tattoos and haircuts and all these different things. So she kind of got into that flow, and Forrest Gump kind of stayed himself and just kept advancing, and he kept having success in ping pong, in the military, meeting President John F. Kennedy. Whatever he did, he was successful in. And then when he had some money, Lieutenant Dan, who was handicapped and was I forget what you call somebody who doesn't have any lower limbs. Is there a name for that? Amputee, a double amputee, right?
There you go. Yes.
And so Lieutenant Dan from Vietnam invested Forrest's money in a company that Forrest Gump thought they were a fruit company, Apple computers in the 1980s. So who wouldn't have wanted to have made that investment? But he became a multimillionaire along the way. And then finally, his girl, Jenny, comes back to him when she knows she's dying, and she decides that she wants to have a child, and Forrest is the man. And then she passes away, and Forrest raises little Forrest. So really neat story that takes the 20th century and encapsulates it in a 2 hour period. And, most of the world liked it, and a lot of people still like it. It's a great way to learn history, and it's a great way to learn about relationships. And, he had some learning disabilities, something along the autistic scale. And he was one of those people who can't say a mean thing, but he takes things to heart and tries to figure out life. And, many people I've talked to said that they wished we had more of that disposition in us that was more like Forrest Gump and people who have Down syndrome, just this kind disposition that good listening skills, good following the rule skills, and those types of things. Over to Nate to hear some of his observations about these types of things.
So thanks, Sifu. It's interesting, very coincidental you bring that movie up, because that is, I would say, one of my top 5 movies, if not one of my favorite movies. And I remember going to the theater to see it here in Philadelphia with a friend. It's probably in high school. So the bottom line of it, he was living his life. He was doing the best he could with what he had. He was overcoming a lot of obstacles with, mental challenges and even physical challenges. Just if you remember the beginning of the movie, where he had the braces.
Yes.
He had to run, get into running, run to school, start playing sports. Like you said, he joined the military, and then at one point, what sticks out a lot in that movie, what you hear in pop culture, is the running across the United States. I just wanted to run. So honestly, I joke with friends. I'm like, in a lot of ways, I feel like I live my life like Forrest Gump, because I want to do these extreme endurance events or extreme running events. And I am like you asked earlier, I am a United States Coast Guard officer, but I didn't actually join the Coast Guard until a later age. I didn't join until 3 years ago. So I joke with friends, like, after maybe one day I'll run across the country as well, but I kind of want to live my life like Forrest Gump did, where he's he's also helping people. He has, like you
Yeah.
point out, he has this extreme altruistic spirit that I love to emulate, and I try to. I mean, and just anybody in life like that, but especially in pop culture, when you see that, you're like, wow, this guy had a pretty awesome life, even though he had all these challenges in the beginning, and he got to have a son, and he got to, at the end, he really passes along all this love to his son. So I think that was a very good film, if not probably my favorite. Probably my favorite film of all time, I would say, definitely up there. So that's
Yeah.
it's interesting that you brought that up as you're speaking this. I'm like, oh, is he reading my mind? Because it's a very interesting topic with the endurance sports and the military, and just trying to help everybody in that movie. Where he even Lieutenant Dan in that film you brought up with their business. I mean, he saves that guy's life, but the guy, Lieutenant Dan, remember, he wanted him to leave him and leave him where he was. He didn't want to get back up. But Forrest, remember, saves his life, and then he saves him again because then he's depressed with no legs, living like that, and then he starts that shrimp business with him and kind of rejuvenates his spirit again. So it's really about, he's also touching, like, he's moving the human spirit throughout the film too in unlikely ways. So yeah, great film.
Yeah, he did his best to fly straight in everything that he did. And one of the things I do in my coaching, and I say, when I'm talking to people, they say, "What is your coaching all about?" I say it's about doing the right thing all the time. That's what you want to do. And that doesn't mean just working hard, which is unfortunately the way a lot of people think, because the Japanese, and their history, and then the Chinese, before the Chinese started working, the Germans were known, and the Germans pay most of the EU's bills, and just they're so productive and so hardworking. And the Americans fall in there somewhere. I mean, during World War II, we were the leaders in production per person, and so we just, all this work ethic, and it goes back to the Protestant work ethic and these other types of work ethics, Puritan, Protestant, all these work ethics. So people think about work as doing the right thing, but I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at a balanced life where we do some joy, we do some downtime, we do some sharing of good stories and songs and being silly during dinner, after dinner, like hunting and gathering tribes. We get in touch with our vibration and the vibration of nature, all those things I would consider doing the right thing. And not being in excess in one area is also doing the right thing. Being, therapeutic to yourself on a regular basis. And like I mentioned to a caller yesterday, I said, my book Sedentary Nation can be summed up in one example. The example of being on a long flight going to Europe or coming back from Europe, when you're on a 7 or 9, 10 hour flight. How do you feel during the flight, and how do you feel afterwards? It's pretty obvious that most of us feel rotten during, a little antsy. I don't take sleeping pills. I know people who do. But I certainly wouldn't want to be woken up by someone having to go to the restroom, or when my food comes when I'm on a sleeping medication. That would be a mess, I would think, but I don't know. I haven't done it. And then just the way you feel when you finally get up, and there's nowhere to go do some stretching really, and the modern planes are so jammed up. But that's the story of non-movement, of being sedentary, is the long airplane flight. It's just, you can feel how bad it is. And some people live their life in a sedentary way, in the car, in the desk, and in the home, and whatever they're doing, it's being kind of structured in a modern so-called sedentary convenience. So over to Nate for a reflection on some of the things I just shared.
Thanks, Sifu. So when you bring up that topic of movement versus sedentary, I was thinking this weekend I had my son, and I know, like I said, the weather here isn't so great in Philadelphia, but even though the weather was cold and blistery, I still wanted to take him and his nephew out. I mean, even though we couldn't use the playground, we still went for a walk. We still did at least a few miles just to walk around and get that movement, because I think having that movement as well as having a routine. I was talking to this, with a friend the other week too. Like, routine saves us, right? Especially if you pair that with movement in your life. And I think just we touched on this our other conversation about a month ago, but just having that that movement in your life, and that the physical movement, it can save you. I mean, it can save your moods, it can bring them back. I'll write about this, I'll journal, I'll write poetry about, I just wrote a poem about movement, and about how it ties to your mind, that mind body connectedness. And I think, like you were saying about being on a long flight, I mean, sometimes that can wear on you, but even just getting up and going and walking up and down the aisle, or just stretching, like, if you have limited space, just to be able to stretch, maybe do some yoga poses, or just even like, do your little cross chest, or just raise your arms up. It feels good. I mean, anytime we're sitting still, sometimes sitting still is needed to contemplate things, but we can also contemplate life through movement too. And sometimes some of the best ideas I know I have, and I talk to others that feel the same, when we're moving, when we're running, when we're doing exercises, yoga, anything, climbing, hiking, good ideas come to us in that stage. So I think movement is definitely key in a lot of realms of life.
So Nate, the Forrest Gump story is he's putting his best effort, his best intention. He knows that he's got some learning disabilities, but he keeps doing well. He's ecstatic when he learns. He gets all broken up when uh, Forrest Jr. is in Jenny's arms, or maybe she put him down and she's talking to Forrest about that, and Forrest says something along the lines of, "Is he?" And he was insinuating is Forrest Jr. Mentally challenged or have a learning disability, and Jenny says no, he's 100% fine, or something along those lines, and then he gets all choked up. So it's a very touching story, and the idea of learning disability is something that I think we had in my school. I don't remember if it was called special ed in the 60s and 70s when I was in my younger days, but later on it became known as special ed. And now it's a very common thing to have learning disabilities in the general population. And so all these kids are on a variety, not all these kids, but many kids, a high percentage, I would say, are on some sort of psychotropic drug or focus drug, and or a stress drug, and these types of things. And I think you can draw a correlation and probably a causation between being stuck in school, not moving, not being excited about movement, like you and I and people in my dad's generation and further on. They couldn't wait to move. They couldn't wait to run, couldn't wait to be silly and try different things. The wheelbarrow races. I have pictures of my grandfather doing that at a church retreat in Pennsylvania back in the 19 teens. He's doing that, with all these people. Almost everyone in the pictures are thin. Even the guys built like you with big shoulders, there's not a lot of extra tissue. They didn't eat a lot and they did move a lot. So, just thin people doing their thing, having fun with physical movement. Yes, they wanted to read and learn a language and this type of thing, and work hard. And they did all the things that you'd want to do as a young developing person, but they weren't taking all of these medications. And if they had stress, the movement and the time with their uncle on the trips, and times with their family members, times with their coaches at school, if they're on a sports team, or their PE teacher, or talking with their friends, and walking a lot, having a bike, running errands. They were more easily entertained than the modern person who, the last 30 years, we've heard of this thing that's boring. That's, I'm bored. That's not that fun. It's like we have an overstimulated society, and it's hard to flip the switch towards entertainment and amusement for people. And then they don't want to get up and engage in the movement. They'd rather, like I was with kids who were watching these breakdancing videos in Sacramento years ago. And it was like when YouTube came out, it was a big switch from the kids themselves seeing some people do a move, or either their friends or on a Michael Jackson video or whatever, and then coming into school and trying to outdo each other and teach each other these wonderful moves. And then when YouTube came out, you could see it escalated into a lot less movement, a lot more watching these people who had incredible skills or had really good editors making these videos. And that became the more common pastime is the watching instead of the trying it yourself and experiencing the movement yourself. Over to Nate for his thoughts.
Thanks again. So I see that you probably need a common balance where it's good to watch and learn, and then watching gives you ideas and contemplating over what you're seeing there. But then you need that balance where you go out and try it yourself, or even just do something original where others can learn. I think some of the topics there you're touching on are things like instant gratification. I feel like we're a society of instant gratification all the time. I know for me, one of the reasons I tapped into these ultra endurance, these sports, running, rowing, paddling, is because they take patience. I mean, you could be out there for a day, days, week, but you really have to tap into your patience. You don't have a screen in front of you either. So I have this conversation with other fellow endurance athletes a lot, where your brain's thinking differently because you're just out in the elements, and you don't have that blue light or that screen, where you're fixated on that. And I, coming back to reality, I always say the real world after these encounters, these adventures, I catch myself doing it too. Like, wow, I haven't looked at this phone in days, So I'm definitely thinking more primal, like the hunter gatherer, that comes up a lot. And I think that is healthier for the human mind. That's what we're meant to think. It's not a bad thing, technology and having access to friends and family, especially for emergencies. But I think, again, you need that balance where, use it when you need to, and use it for entertainment or use it to learn skills. Like on YouTube, like you said, watching YouTube, we can learn a lot of things we didn't know before. We have so much access to information, but maybe too much or over access of it is what can sometimes hurt our brain or put us into these mental state thoughts. There's these experiences are in our mind where we're like, am I sitting around too much watching this? And is that healthy for my brain? Shouldn't I just get out and do it? Shouldn't I just get out and go hunt, go gather, go do what I was meant to do as a human being? So that's what comes to my mind, is just having that, using that technology to benefit us and learn and share experiences with each other over long distances, we wouldn't be able to tap into back in the day, but also getting out there and actually living it and doing it. And I think that's what you need to have a balanced and healthy life.
So the idea of Mr. Gump saying, well, I had a problem and I went for a run, and then I had another problem and I went for a little bit longer run, and then one day I just kept on running. And that's the one where he goes across the United States,
Right.
and he gets a bunch of mud thrown up by a semi, I think, and he takes his shirt up and he wipes it off, and then he's got the smiley face that we all know. I can't remember if somebody actually invented that, or I looked it up back in the 90s to see where that came from. But then he invents the smiley face. He's just doing all these wonderful serendipitous things. So that was his experience, and the running helped him. Then he says later on, one day I just stopped running. And so share with us a little bit about your athletic background, and if you have any parallels with the life of Forrest Gump and Jenny.
So I think we just spoke about, but thinking about that movie, movement, has saved my life in a lot of ways. Like Forrest, I think it seems like at some point in time, he just had so much stress. He just felt like running, right? So as simple as it sounds, it can help. I mean, all that movement can change your mood, can get you to think differently about your life, put things in perspective. And just being out there in elements, like, interestingly enough, I remember parts of that movie where he's out in out west in the deserts. I believe one part's Utah. I have gone past that highway in certain, like it was Moab 240. And I remember looking over at a fellow runner out there. He's like, "This is right where they filmed that scene in Forrest Gump, or it's like a few miles away." And I'm like, "This is awesome. That's who I want to be there." So I've almost I literally almost ran those parts in the movie. So, and then thinking about why he started running, where he was so distraught, or seems like he couldn't mentally deal with what was going on with his girlfriend, or the love of his life, I should say. I know for me, from an early on experience, even high school, it wasn't necessarily running, but it was movement. I remember having a breakup. It was probably 15 or 16. And I remember being at lunch at school and looking over and seeing, they were doing tryouts for the rowing team. And I was like, you know what? It would probably, I have so much mental anguish going on right now in my head. Maybe I should just walk over there and sign up. And I usually wouldn't do something like that. I was a bit shy. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go try it. So from like this trauma, you can and by going into the movement, you can experience like really great um things in life. I mean, like that Forrest Gump movie is an analogy of that. Like he had so much going on. Like the braces in his legs. His mom was sick. She passed away. He was being made fun of, but through doing and being and moving, I mean, he ran and then he started. Why people wanted to know in that film too why he was running, and he just like I just felt like running. But even their perception of him, they were like, "Are you running for world peace?" I mean, they were almost coming up with reasons for why he was running, which is interesting. But I think just by starting and doing something that simple, you can motivate others and motivate yourself into better moods. So I know it did for me going through, bad relationships, a rough marriage, a rough custody battle. Running is not just running, but movement in general has saved my life. Rather than sit around and be sedentary and just worry about things. I mean, we can really reshape our brain and mind through the movement, I feel like.
So in in a writer and an author's charge, their motivation, it's often to capture their era. And the famous book On the Road, um, the guy was in Big Sur, California, writing that book, and I'll think of his name in a second.
Jack
Columbia,
Kerouac.
Jack Kerouac, Columbia football player, didn't finish Columbia. I think he was injured by playing running back at Columbia, or I think it was running back, and then he couldn't get into World War II, so he had to join the Merchant Marines. And then Kerouac eventually goes on that big trip across the United States in a car from the period or 10, 20 years before. He writes On the Road. He develops this idea of writing with a spool of paper that is like it's like a receipt on a roller. So he had a way to put that in his typewriter, and he could just do the stream of consciousness writing. I have, he's considered a master because of the time that he wrote this book in the 60s, I believe. But I can't read his stuff. I've only actually tried two, but his stream of consciousness writing is not entertaining to me. It might have been back in the 80s, but when I tried it about 10, 12 years ago, it wasn't entertaining to me. Hemingway, some of his stuff is entertaining to me, and it was back in the 70s and the 80s, and some of it's not. So be careful when you readers out there with my stuff or with anybody's stuff to to make the claim for yourself whether you're enjoying it or not, because when we grew up in school and when we were looking at bestsellers, a lot of things were promoted with propaganda saying that this guy's the best author since sliced bread, or this is a pivotal book because of X, Y, and Z. But if it's not appealing to you, you don't have to call it the great one or your favorite or anything, and you don't even have to finish after the 10th or 12th page if it doesn't draw you in. So that's kind of what happened to On the Road with me. I may tap into it again to see if I can discover the magic, because I'm really interested in authors and what they're trying to do rather than just the words on the page and the chapters. So I will give it another shot. But when I was writing Sedentary Nation, well, even before I wrote it, I said, I'm a wellness guy. I study wellness. I live wellness. I teach other people. I do sports. I do a sedentary job oftentimes, and then I just do lots of physical activity during the day. So I could write about what I do, but I want to figure out something how it's going to help other people. So I started asking, and this went on for about 8 to 12 years in Northern California and Southern California, and on any of the trips I went on around the world. I started asking psychologists, because that's something that when I was in school in the 60s and 70s, it was very rare to have any of our parents going to one or any of the kids going to one. It was just rare. And then it got very popular in the 90s and it just kept growing. And now it's, of course, could be $200 or $300 for an hour just with your standard local. I'm not saying they're not good or as good as anybody in Harvard or anything. They could be very good, but it's just expensive, $200 or $300, and you're doing Zoom and it's 50 minutes because you got to set up the appointment and this and that, and they have to go to take a break before their next appointment. So I started asking these people, these psychologists, and I would guess that I've asked 300 or 400 people. So what's the number one thing that's driving these people to now it's a Zoom call, and then before it was to your office? And so see if Nate, you can guess what it was.
So I would say anxiety slash depression. I would say, and a lot of that, like we talked about, would be due to a lot of screen time, due to a lot of sedentary movement. They're bored, and I think their thoughts start to wander. And then I think a lot of times the human brain will shift towards a negative if you're just not physically doing anything. I mean, you'll think towards worst case scenarios. So I would say it's anxiety, depression, for me. I mean, from my take on it. So
Okay, so you answered the part B of the main heading. So the B is the fallout that comes from the problem that this one thing that we all do every day not very well. That's the fallout is what you just mentioned. So in Ayurvedic medicine, which goes back 5,000 years and it could be longer, or it could be a little bit shorter, but it's something incredibly long. And they've got records of this, the Vedic texts and the other ancient texts from India. They talk about how lack of sleep is the driving mechanism to depression, to anxiety, etc., and to more sleep disorders. So that's and then digestion, attentiveness, focus, all these things fall into that horrible fallout from the lack of proper sleep. But when a person gave the seminar I went to back in 2009, I said, and I mentioned this in front of the group because I think it's good to confront thought, even if it's like an ancient martial art or anything. Confront the thing and see if it holds up, which is one of the reasons why when somebody's arguing for their particular faith in a religion, I've heard this. I didn't invent this statement, but I said, don't you think that your God could handle a person's disagreement with something? Do you think your God could handle that? And they, if some are so interested and defensive about it, they don't get that question. They'll just get more defensive. But the other ones will go, yeah, my God could handle that. So it's okay to ask questions and to be a detractor to these types of things. So what I said to her in front of the group, I said, one thing I would add to this ancient philosophy of not enough sleep leads to depression and anxiety and all these other things is too much sleep. Put that in there because a lot of people are sleeping 10 and 15 hours and lounging all the time and they never quite wake up and they never quite go to sleep. And then the other one is improper sleep, so that they've got, they're obese and they've got blood sugar issues and they're getting up to eat, to go to the bathroom, all these types of things throughout their sleep. They're not getting into the proper amount. I think REM might be 4 hours. You don't want to be in REM for longer than that, or if I remember correctly. But there, some really good sleep research out there, and people are really into this, and they've done a lot of studies. I'm not saying all their studies are correct and all their treatments and prescriptions are correct, but there are a lot of things we know about sleep, a lot of things we know about biochemistry. So you have to take Ayurveda and go, it's not just lack of sleep, it's lack of proper sleep and not having too much sleep. And the way I sleep is not too much at night, compared to the people who can't take naps. So instead of doing 8 or 9 or longer, I'll do 5 to 6.5 at night. And then I'll do a nap whenever I need it. Thankfully, I'll do it, whether it's at 10 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon, whenever I need it, I'll do it. Sometimes I've done 2 in one day. It's not common, but I'll do 2 in one day. And amazingly, when I wake up, my excretion wants to happen. So it's like, okay, I eat a lot of food, do a lot of exercise. So I take all this food in, and the blood for people like me and athletes like you, the blood leaves the brain. It goes down to the digestive tract and it does its magic with enzymes and processing and all these types of things. But that blood leaving the brain means less oxygen and less energy. So we conk out. And then we wake up, we can excrete, and then we're peaceful and we're feeling good. And we can go back to whatever we want to do or whatever we're able to do after that. So that's the reason I wrote Sedentary Nation. Is the psychologist told me that the number one driver of people coming to see them, and I started asking that in the around 1990, maybe 1985, and then I wrote my book starting in 2008. Sedentary Nation. It was about a 4-year process to do the research and editing and fine tuning of that one. So I encourage people to take a look and see if they think I hit my mark with that book. Over to Nate for his reply to that.
Thanks for explaining that, Sifu. It is very interesting, and it's definitely something that's on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people as they get older is the sleep aspect. Like how much should you get? What's recommended? I think I recently looked it up too, and it was what I found fascinating was, I think the magic number was about 6 or 7, and I think over a certain age, and this is just one recommendation I saw, was there was actually less sleep recommended. I think after you hit 60 or 70. So I don't know if that's because of the makeup of the human brain, or like you said, you don't want to also get too much sleep and overdo it, and then your body's sort of craving it, to use a non like a medical term. But I think the balance is there. I think, and going back to the movement aspect, I think I sleep better after movement, and after certain diets. Lately, I've been experimenting my own diet the last few years. For instance, at one point, I just had this conversation yesterday at lunch with a friend, but I was trying a keto type diet. I talked about that in the other interview we had about the fat burning diet, slow fat burn, to try to do better at the endurance challenges, which seemed to work. But lately, I've been doing more of a vegetarian / vegan diet. I haven't completely cut out dairy, but I think that'll be the goal within the next few weeks. But I'm noticing, like you touched upon, and in your book about, the blood flow and changing moods, even, which is all correlated with the diet and the sleep. So I think it's all interesting and fascinating, especially as we grow older. And I've had this discussion too about, longevity and blue lines around the world with friends, and the amount of sleep and their diet. So it's the kind of information I think is useful as we traverse through life and try to find a healthy balance of mental, physical needs for us.
So to interject what I didn't finish because I went on for a while, which is part of my teaching. I'm not, when I interview people, I'm actually doing what I do, which is thinking about how I came upon things, how I learned things, and how I found things that worked. And I hope other people share theirs back. But there are some interviewers out there who just ask questions most of the time and get responses and say ah, ooh, e, and then ask another question. But mine is really, like we're two coaches sharing these stories about how we learned about things and what we found that works, what we found that worked in one decade and doesn't work as much now. We evolved with our program. We tried something new and that worked. So that's kind of what I do with I call them discussions rather than just an interview, so people can get a better picture of what I do with these podcasts. But what I found in my reason to offer that book, Sedentary Nation, I didn't want to just say people are going to psychologists and psychiatrists and life coaches because they have sleep disorders. I had to have a solution. And my solution was that I've been through stressful times in my life. I've been through breakups where I would, wake up at 2 or 4 in the morning for a period of 6 months and still did my workouts, still did all those things, but I didn't know how to deal with jealousy or lack or rejection. And I think I know how to deal with those three right now. I don't like dealing with waste of time. I don't think I'll ever get over being a professional and having someone waste my time, like use my information and not compensate me for that, not buy a book, not do anything to help the process where I just help them, or I was trying to sell them a product or something, like in my past life and doing different sales jobs. If they just wasted my time and used my ideas and I got nothing out of it, and they had 20,000 a month coming in and I had zero, I was really ticked off. And I think I'm still ticked off to this day about people like that, because I call them users. They took an idea and they took 100% for themselves and didn't give me anything. And I'm the one who brought the idea to them. So there's a little bit on the touchy side, but hey, that's a human human personality. We're all human. And I didn't like that. But what I found in my book is I knew that the physical activity and the huffing and puffing, you can do weight training, do all these things. Sometimes weight training is huffing and puffing. But if you're doing tennis, which is anaerobic, but has some aerobic in there, if you can play the points long enough, and you have, sports like Nate does, extreme endurance sports, you have aerobics, you have cross country skiing, you have walking and running. If you're doing treadmill, you're doing some of these aerobics mixed in with some exercise and some functional training and putting weight on your bones. You do all these things, you're going to be hired at the end of the day if your system's not doesn't have some biochemical issue that needs something else. Perhaps maybe you need a shaman, maybe you need a pharmaceutical. Don't know until you try and see what works. But I knew that history told me that my grandfather's generation, people born in the 1890s to 1905, my grandmother was born in 1904, one was born in 1903. So this generation, they had to go to sleep at the end of the day because their jobs were so arduous in the 1800s and 1900s, farming or industry or being a truck driver or whatever it was. There was a lot of physicality, and some of these people did 7 day a week jobs, some did 6 day a week jobs, and they ate very little calories because they couldn't afford them. Food was not plentiful, the refrigeration wasn't available. So I knew that those people, the only way they could have done a 20 to 50 year length of job and school or longer, if let's say they lived to be 60, starting in 1890, which was not uncommon. The lifespan of my grandfather's era was probably 58, 62, somewhere in there. He lived until he was 72 on one side. The other one died of a cerebral hemorrhage when he was 50. No previous experience of anything, health setback, just had a cerebral hemorrhage, dead at 50. And he was athletic, so you don't know sometimes. But their generations were tired at the end of the day. They had stress galore. They had harder jobs than most of us had in terms of physical, in terms of being released by your employer and having a new person that was younger, cheaper, and ready to work long, focused hours. They had more of that than we have now. But they still got to sleep at the end of the day with all of their stressors and the many kids that they had, and kids that didn't have access to medical care and didn't have as many ways to intervene and knock out things like polio and all these other things they had to deal with. So my hypothesis, and I think I proved that in my research, is that the reason they could go to sleep at the end of the day was because they had to in order to do their job, and their job was so demanding. And then they had walking upstairs with a sack of potatoes if they lived in New York or Philadelphia. And my one grandfather used to save a nickel by walking home instead of taking the trolley in New Jersey. So think about how these people live. A lot of them were poor. Most of them were poor. A lot of physical work, not a lot of calories, and lots of kids and lots of responsibility. But they were around family. They had hopefully a supportive structure. A lot of times the immigrants stayed together, the Irish, the Italians, the Poles, the Germans. A lot of them, they grew up in certain jurisdictions that were predominantly that group. A lot of them, like my ancestors, intermarried. The Germans married the Irish, the English married the Polish, this type of thing. And then they had to get to sleep at, I say within 2 hours after dinner. So if dinner was at 7, they had to get to sleep by 9 in order to do their commute, get to work, work in a loading dock, work in a factory, load a truck, whatever they were doing. And then they had to do that again, maybe 5, 6, or sometimes 7 days a week. And they had to make it through that really tough time. And they had to go to sleep and they were tired. And that's how it worked for them. So if we fast forward to the last 30 years of this highly sedentary lifestyle, I say you have to poop yourself out. You don't want to exhaust yourself too frequently, but poop yourself out, get all those emotions out, get the sweat on, get the breathing, tire your muscles and bones and ligaments and tendons out. Let that all out. Tennis, fitness, running, walking, taking your dogs for a walk, whatever you can do, and you will hopefully improve your sleep. And if you're not improving your sleep, and you've done this with an open heart and an open mind, you've been with coaches like me. I haven't had a failure yet. So if you haven't tried me, I won't accept that you're a failure on this, that you need pharmacology. But give these things a try and see if they help you with your sleep. And I think that whole pattern, that circular pattern, will improve your lives substantially.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about 2 different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
When you discuss grandparents and how they lived and this regimented lifestyle where they had to work in these factories or do like laborious jobs, I've heard this a lot from my own father, who talked about he believes he does physical therapy, but he believes that having these physically demanding jobs almost keeps your health intact. I mean, there's definitely stressors there as well, but he believes like those laborious jobs kind of keep that the person going as well. I think back of my own experience. I used to shovel snow for the city of Philadelphia in my spare time as like a labor job. And I remember doing it for 10 plus hours, sometimes 15 hours, and the cold conditions outside, and just hitting the bed hard when I got home. But I remember having like this deep sleep where, I couldn't get that if I was sitting around a desk job all day, and of course I have that type of job as well over the years, but I think back to those physically demanding jobs and my moods. When I first joined the Coast Guard, I was an electrician's mate, and I took an active duty position in Cape May, New Jersey on the base. And I pretty much just went around and fixed a lot of electrical work. I was climbing ladders. I was crawling through near vents. And that was the same type of experience where I'd go home and I mean, I am tired. I'm walking around these military boots all day, except just the physicality of these jobs. It puts you in a different job, not job, but different mindset. And then I'd go back to my counseling job after active duty and be like, wow, that was such a change. But I think, again, it goes back to a balance. I did enjoy my time as electricians for them, but I also enjoy helping people, in other aspects, how we're talking and discussing life. And, but I think you need that balance. Like if we have that office type of sedentary type of, sit job, you need to get outside after work or before work and just move. And I think that's how you keep, your mental agility up as well, through that movement. There was a quote as you're talking to, I was thinking about, it was a Tibetan proverb. I had to look it up, but It was on the tip of my tongue, but the quote is, "The secret to living well is to eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure." And I think that really kind of sums it up. Is where, you touched upon it too. Grandparents, etc. Back in the day, they didn't have all this money to buy a lot of food, so they weren't eating as much. But maybe they were almost forced into this healthy lifestyle. Besides the stress of it, of course, they weren't eating as much, and they had these physically intense jobs. So they were doing it. Nowadays, most of us are living more sedentary lifestyle, and we're craving that type of lifestyle they had to live. So it's kind of an interesting aspect when you put it all together.
Yeah, so there's so many things that I imagine you read about, and I hope our viewers are reading about and listening to. And it's the idea, one of the other big pieces of my philosophy is it's not about the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Is that his full name?
Yes.
Dwayne Johnson.
Yes.
And it's not, you don't want to spend your time trying to be a Herculean looking person. Unfortunately, he's a good actor, he's hardworking, and he's doing all this stuff. I don't think he's 100%er. I wish him all the best. I hope he becomes 100%er, but I think he's a sellout. And I think he's in the same group with Oprah and a lot of these elites, that they're so rich that they're putting on a facade when they're out there in public. It's not all bad, but I think it's a facade. I don't think we're getting to their true nature, which I think is somewhat diabolical and dark oftentimes. And they're running with these false narratives too. That's easy for me to show. The other one is more along the lines of the hidden agenda type of things, which some people call conspiracy theories. But Joe Rogan talked about Oprah and buying the land on Maui. You could look that up on YouTube. And I'm not saying all the facts are in on that, but I'm saying there's a lot of doubt that I have about the authenticity of Oprah, who's gotten this huge following, just like Mother Teresa got a huge following and still does. Look up Christopher Hitchens on Mother Teresa. I think she's a phony, and I think Christopher Hitchens has proven it. So the things that you sometimes hold up on high are really things that should be taken down a lot of notches. And in the case of these elite looking monster type people, they used to be people that were in the circus acts, and they could bend bars and they could lift things. And people would say, look at this person, he's a Herculean type person. It's really for this giant show thing. It's not really a functional thing typically. Now, some people were functionally strong, could climb, and one of the most famous circus performers ever I watched, I think he's a former Russian country guy back in the 1800s, but you look that guy up, the circus strongman. He wasn't that big, and he did all of these incredible things that people who outweighed him by 50 pounds were doing. But look that guy up. And so there are some legitimate people, but what we should be looking for is functionality. And that's functional everything: your digestion, your thought, your teeth, your ability to chew food, your ability to breathe, your ability to work, think, write, raise your kids, learn how to take care of your animals. You don't own a dog. I learned this within the last few years. You're a dog handler. The dog's his own or her own thing, and you're handling them, and you're allowing them to be dogs. You're not making them be your friend like a human. We want a friend. So those are some of the mistakes we make with dogs. We want them to be human, but they're actually a dog, and they like being a dog. And we're supposed to enhance the things that dogs like to do and are good at and want to help us with, all those things. So learning to be that well-rounded human, and learning how to be functional and not trying to be this ginormous person, and I'm sure it helps in some sports, but sumo is not a good thing for you. We talked about triathlon, how some of these extreme athletes and people who train too much, they're sick a lot, and they have a lot of biomechanical dysfunction. They may have normally probably some sort of a mental thing that goes along with that overtraining, because you're over fatiguing your system. You're in pain a lot. You're pressing your heart too hard. So all those types of things. So this idea of being in balance on the one hand, but the Forrest Gump story of one day I just kept running, that was his therapy. So that is really good. And if somebody needs to be an endurance athlete, either they can provide for their family with that, or it keeps them from committing suicide. It allows them to sleep and allows them to deal with their stress and all of those things, or they're just good at it and they're not breaking their systems down. All those things are the positive sides of these extreme athletic endeavors. So over to Nate for some comments.
Thanks, Sifu. And I think what you're saying about that, I think going back to the term routine, but it's not just about having any routine, it's about having a healthy, balanced routine. Overdoing anything could be, detrimental. Caffeine, drinking, even the working out. So what I find, I'm going through it now as an example. A few weeks back, I did another ultra run through Minnesota, northern Minnesota.
Can you describe that for us and what you did? Because I'm sure the viewers want to hear that.
Oh, sure. Yes. So it was called the Arrowhead 135. It's a 135-mile sled pull or pulk pull where you have all your gear. I touched upon this the other interview we had, but
tell us about the weight you're pulling and how much is there in the beginning, middle, and end that you're pulling.
So there's two options for this race. It was supported, which means you can stop at, there's 3 aid stations. You could stop at all 3 during the event every 30 something miles. Or there was unsupported. I chose unsupported honestly thinking that meant I wasn't going to bring a team or a crew to help me. But that, by the race director's definition, that meant I'm not allowed to use any of the aid station or go into cabins and get warm. So I chose the harder route and I stuck with it. And I remember even going to pick up my race bib at the meeting, him going, "You sure you want to do this? You've never done the race before." But I felt confident and comfortable because I had not done his race, but I've done longer distances, different parts of the country and the world. But anyway, answering your question, with all my gear, I stuffed to boil water. I had a mini stove. I had a negative 40-degree sleeping bag. I had extra clothes. I had all my calories I was going to eat. And I had drinking water in thermoses. So that added up to be about, I'm going to say like 50 pounds, give or take. So I'm pulling this through these snowy conditions, the sled, and you're going 135 miles on a trail that's meant for snowmobiles. This particular year, it wasn't as cold as it usually is. So that was a blessing. Because there's always that thought of frostbite sneaking in where I'm like, am I going to lose a finger? My nose is going to get dry.
Just describe the 3 or 4 different temperatures and conditions that you dealt with commonly.
So 3 or 4 different conditions would be slush. It warmed up during the day with the sun out. So when I say warm, it still was, 10, 20 degrees, but it wasn't below freezing. So in a way that was good because you weren't worrying about frostbite as much. I had thicker layers on, but then you start to sweat was the problem. So then you need to shed layers and you're gaining more weight by this water, coming off your body. Then it would get cold again at night. So then you're worried, okay, all that sweat is going to freeze. So then, by the snow melting and the trails becoming slush though, it's adding more resistance to the pull. So you're also going up, it's about 7,000 feet of elevation by the end of the race. And so you have that weight. It almost became less of running and more, I joke with a friend, CrossFit, because when you get to a certain point, it sort of yanks you like you're opening up a parachute where the sled's kind of drifting back and your body's getting jolted. So you're just kind of getting yourself used to these conditions it took me 48 hours. And I was able to finish it unsupported and I was proud of that. But what I ran into was running out of water, trying to melt snow. I think there was 5 or 6 of us on the course that did it unsupported. We were all joking. Like I kept playing, we'll call it tag with another runner. And he said, "Oh, I finally did it. I boiled the snow. It only took me 2 hours." So we had to sit there in the cold and boil snow for 2 hours just to get some hydration. And I remember finding like a stream of water and I was going to drink it. And the local was like, "Don't drink that. There's beaver all over the area. It's contaminated." So I ended up taking the water in my canteen, but then boiling it to sanitize it. So things like that.
How long did it take you to boil it?
It took me just over an hour, probably. I mean, it was quicker than using the snow, which would have taken longer because of the temperature. The snow is frozen, but it's just another way to do it. I'm glad it worked out and I finished, but it definitely, it was almost a comedy in certain ways, because I remember seeing volunteers at cabins, and they just wanted to wave. You had to wave high and bye and give them your bib number and just keep going into the woods because you weren't allowed to use any of the resources. But I remember sitting on my sled trying to take a nap. I only slept for about 10 minutes the whole race because I was nervous I wouldn't have enough time to finish. But I remember boiling that water, getting calories, but other racers that were getting support run by me and go, "Are you one of those crazy people that are doing this unsupported?" And I would just say yes, as they saw me boiling water next to me. So it was quite the experience, but I guess it all ties into that theme of movement, right? But in extreme ways. And I came back home to kind of rest and recover, and that's part of the balance. I've been walking. I do a lot of walking after these events. I still try to move, but not as extreme. Like I'll do a few miles walking for the next couple of weeks. I might try a run, but my ankles are pretty blown up from all the pulling the sled up the mountains. So I've just been kind of in recovery mode for that balance aspect lately, using a thorough gun. Like I said, going for walks, stretching, doing yoga. So for me, it's just trying to find that balance. If you do something so extreme with your body, I know it's going to take a bit of time for it to rest right. Or I'll try to swim, like I said, and do these non-impact sports, bike, but not overdo it because I don't want any permanent injury.
I'm looking at the YouTube channel and the video that went up, you and I did, and it went up 2 weeks ago. It's got 268 views, called Ultra Marathon Runner Reveals Insights on Mental Toughness and Surviving Extreme Challenges. So thank you for sharing a little bit about the conditions. So you mentioned slush. So, and then you also mentioned it didn't get below freezing. So are you saying that the sun melted things and friction melted things, but the temperature, you mentioned 10, and then you also mentioned didn't go, are you talking Fahrenheit? And so how do we correlate what you said with 32 degrees is below, anything below 32 is below freezing in Fahrenheit? And what were the temperatures like when you woke up, midday when there was sun, midday when there's no sun, end of day, and then the coldest it got in the night? I guess it's when you woke up might have been the coldest.
Okay, so yeah, to clarify, I misspoke because below freezing, I'm thinking, well, I am talking about Fahrenheit, and I think I meant to say below zero because in these other races, sled races I've done, it has been below zero. I don't believe this year there wasn't a polar vortex. That can be northern Minnesota can be the coldest part of the continental US, I learned, but this year they didn't get those temperatures, so it was below 30 degrees at times, but it never went below zero. So yes, there was times it could have frozen. I don't think I didn't feel as much of that freezing temperature though, because I was moving so much. When I did stop, you would see the steam come off my body, other runners' bodies though, from the body heat. But yeah, to explain it better, I meant below zero, but in Fahrenheit. And it was still definitely quite the experience. It was just a different type of challenge. Like I said, you weren't dealing with temperatures below zero, but you're dealing with snow melting. Roots were exposed as well. And part of the challenge is when you pull the sled up the hill, you are allowed to ride on the sled going down in the descents. And I was joking with a buddy that came out to do it together. He's like, you've mastered. Like I took some video of me riding. We call it belly flop whopping down the hill like Frosty the Snowman. But he's like, you've mastered the belly whopping of this. I'm like, I've done a few of these, and I think you're so grateful not to have to run anymore or move and get a little bit of a break. You're sort of just laying. For me, it was like a little kid laying on the sled, just going down these mountains. So that was an interesting aspect of this type of endurance challenge as well.
How did you do the sleep? Was there a tent? Did you get certain number of hours in this 135? How did you handle the sleep or rest?
So I did bring an emergency bivy, where it's called a healing bivy, and it almost looks like a tomb, like a mummy tomb. So it has a little pole, it's like a mini tent, and it just fits one person's body inside. So you can roll your -degree sleeping bag in there. I've used it in the Arctic. This race was shorter. I'll say the word short because it was 135 miles, but I ended up just laying on top of my sled at times and kind of tucking my fingers and hands in my armpits for body heat with the gloves on, of course, and just kind of covered my face. And I didn't even end up taking out the bivy just to save time. So I just laid on the sled. I think the last night I laid on the sled for about 10-15 minutes, and I might have got 10 minutes of sleep. I don't know if it was REM or not, but it worked a bit. It got me a little bit revived. But I remember being woken up by wolves, wolves like howling. So that was a good alarm clock. I was like, well, they sound kind of close. And I remember shining my headlight around and being like, I'm just going to keep moving. Because
how many times did you take a horizontal rest break in your 135 miles, and how many days or hours did that take?
So as far as the accumulated rest, I'm going to say I probably stopped. I did stop to change socks. I wasn't necessarily sleeping at that point, but I changed. Your socks will start to sweat too. I start off with 3 layers of socks, thinking it might get really cold. It did get really cold, but then all that movement, I sweated. So then I went from 3 layers to 2 layers. And then I think the last half of the race, I just went down to 1 merino wool layer of socks. So I probably changed them out every 15-20 miles. So I was stopping for that rest / sock change break probably about 5 times. So I'd say probably at least a few hours of just at least sitting on the sled and eating, or just changing out sweaty gear. But as far as regular sleep, only 15 minutes or less through 48 hours. And your mind does start to wander. Yeah. you start to really talk about mental focus, because you're really, I was listening to podcasts, I was listening to audio books, I was listening to music. I always save that for the end to kind of have like a reward or treat, I'd call it, to get me through the last like 20-30 miles. But it did work. So
what you're saying is that you had some sort of a listening device, an iPhone or whatever, and then you had batteries, maybe backup batteries. Is that how you did that?
So I had my iPhone with me. I always keep it, and they want you to keep it for GPS. I download the course map, and I have it in airplane mode though, so everything is already pre-saved in case I don't have any phone service. I actually was able to call a friend, which was nice. Just again, you do these tricks I've learned to kind of rejuvenate your spirit out there, especially in the middle of the night, or even if you can come across another runner. It happens sometimes. Sometimes you don't see anybody for a while, but just to have a conversation about life, about how you're doing, just to get your mind off like the suffering out there, it helps a lot. So just kind of like how we're talking now, it's nice to have that human connection out there if you can, and just really, even if it's a podcast. So
have you ever done cornstarch? Here's a Spanish one: fécula de maíz. Have you ever done cornstarch in your drawers and your shoes, like a lot of it?
No, but I have heard of that being done. I have not tried that one yet.
So it's an absorbent, and it's friendly. It's a natural one. So one of my things that I do before I go to tennis or out on the town, this only lasts about 2 hours. So I just take from that container, I put it in this container, and I just grab it when my shirt is already on, and I just put it on my pit. So I've got about 2 hours of good absorption, and then it's all going to be used up. But that's not bad. And if I had this with me, I could do another application. But when you go with the let's say the healthier, the more healthful deodorants, especially in a hot area like where I am now, where it's hot and humid, all that stuff is just going to start seeping out of there, and then you've kind of got this goo or liquefaction, then it goes into your clothes. And this stuff, and people are going to get grossed out by this, but when I play tennis for 2 hours, I can get 3 uses of my socks, because I will load the bottom of my tennis sneakers with this. There'll be, not every square millimeter is going to have this on it, but it'll move when I'm playing tennis or running. So, and I'll have socks on, and then I take the socks when I get home. They're not wet, and if they're wet, they're like 5 or 10% of if I didn't have this in there. So that's amazing. I just put them out in the sun and they're good to go. And if I'm playing on clay, nobody cares because your socks in 15 minutes are already going to be brown anyway. So this is one thing that I found that works pretty well for short term. I don't use antiperspirant because I want to keep things natural. And I don't want, I mean, this is one of the worst areas besides your mouth, your mucous membranes, nose, eyes. This is one of the worst areas to put harmful chemicals, is right here. There's so much absorption. It's such a sensitive area. So, for all those people who don't get it, if they are healthy and they're not full of toxins already and they're not obese, if you're obese and you have a bunch of layers, you're going to be sweating all the time. And this is just going to, what smells is the poo of the bacteria. The excretion of the bacteria is what smells. And then other things happen after that. The yeast and other things will start to grow. But this stuff, for people who are fit and are less toxic, give this a try. For anybody, give this a try in your shoes, but also try the underarms. And then if you have a pair of spandex pulling up towards you, if you have, let's say if I was on a jujitsu thing, I would do boxer shorts, and then I would do the small rash guard over that. And then I might do a big rash guard over that to protect my legs from the gi, which is very rough and it rubs on you when you're on the mat. And I'm sensitive, so I don't have a lot of hair on my body, and my skin is sensitive to a lot of harsh, coarse rubbing. But I would put this right in my drawers, back and front, and then under the pits, and I'd be in the jujitsu center for 1.5 to 2 hours of pretty heavy duty stuff, pretty good sweat. And even if everything else winds up getting wet, there's a bit of absorption that does. And then I'll take that jujitsu and all the inner clothing home. I'll stick everything in the sun that could be used one more time. And the undergarment type stuff, I'll just take it and take a shower with it and then put it out on the line or the fence in the sun. And it's good to go. What you don't want to do is take all that stuff, put it in with a bunch of chemicals in the washing machine, and then run it on a rinse that doesn't get that all out, and then go back in the jiu-jitsu gym and you've got these Tide type, the ones that have all these different additives in it. Some Tides are probably healthier than others. And you go back in and you sweat, and you and your training partners that are in your groin, like you're doing a triangle choke, they're right there in your groin, or they're right there when you're sweating out of your chest, and all that Tide and this chemicals from detergents, and the worst is fabric softener. My God, that stuff's coming out of there with all of your sweating, and they've got to breathe those toxic and then sweaty chemicals. And a lot of people only wear the rash guards, which are a polyester type thing or a lycra, and they are spandex, and they're sweating, and then they go to another class right after that, and they're just this big ball of sweat wherever they go. They're leaving just like a pool. They don't get that you have to have like cotton underneath, like I'll wear a long sleeve t-shirt underneath the spandex rash guard, and then I take all that off if I want to do one more half hour or whatever, and I'll put a fresh little deal on so that I'm absorbing that. It's kind of like you're radiating sweat when you stop jujitsu, you're doing your stretch, you're still sweating oftentimes for another 10 to 15 minutes. So if they don't want you to take off your shirt, sacrifice the first one, then take it off, and then go put the second one on, where you've got this fresh deal for you and your opponent to navigate through in a much more hygienic way, and much more, what would you call it, less offensive way. Over to you, Nate.
I think those are good tips. I'll definitely take the cornstarch one as a natural way to pretty much soak up the sweat, because I definitely am a sweaty person by nature with all, especially trying to tackle these endurance challenges. I've been getting way more and more into the natural, like you're speaking of lately, like with trying to do a vegan or vegetarian at least diet. And I just recognize the benefits of that. And I recognize the benefits of what you're saying of not using these products with so much chemicals in them. It's just not the way we were meant to be. And then all the side effects that can come up from the different chemicals or the additives. So I think they're all good points. I'm finding, mentally and physically, I'm in much better shape, but with the organic slash natural route. I try to promote that now as much as I can. I don't try to preach it so much as just kind of, if I'm out to eat with a friend and they're like, well, are you gonna have this, are you gonna have that? And I'm like, nah, I'm just trying something right now. This is what I'm comfortable with. So you bring up a lot of good points, especially with trying to live this healthy lifestyle. I mean, it's just a better route to go. And I learned this as I get older too. And I try to pass this on to my son and friends, but in a way where it's, not preaching so much. It's just like, hey, this is just a better option, a better choice, but letting them also decide for themselves.
You have another 5 minutes, Nate?
I do.
So on one of the Rogan shows that I saw maybe 4 years ago, he was talking to, and he's a cannabis user. He does some drinking and cigar smoking when he parties. I don't know what he does on a normal basis, but I'm kind of more of a wellness. I shouldn't say kind of, I don't like that word. I am a more wellness oriented person than Rogan is. I do more natural things and less staying up late at night, and no cigars, and don't like to be around cigars. And but if I were hanging out with Winston Churchill, if I went back to 1943, I'd have a cigar and a cognac with him without any problem. I think he's a fascinating guy. But I will say that on one of the shows, Rogan was talking about and the person he was interviewing, they had friends in common. And the one couple was a man and a wife with kids and jobs and the whole thing. And they were just fighters, they were combative all the time and tripping each other up. And, here's a couple in their 30s or 40s or 50s with kids, and they just were on each other all the time. And Rogan was saying, if these people just did some cannabis, some gummies, some edible at the end of the day or on their weekend in the morning and just mellowed out a little bit, amazing what he thinks their relationship could be by minimizing all that stress and testing each other and belittling each other. So I started thinking about that. And then I thought about relationships that I had where we did lots of physicality in the morning, had food after that. So we had like 2 or 3 hours together in the morning frequently. And then it would set us up for the whole day. So the phone call and the WhatsApp or whatever that happened later was something that was just like a little how do you do? There was no big download needed, no big sharing needed. We had spent all this time together and we got a lot of this emotional, physical energy out, took a shower down at the beach, whatever, and then got into our day. And then we saw each other later in the day for a meal or a stretch in the evening. And that system, with all the rat race stuff we do and the gerbil wheel stuff that we do and the stress and the the challenges we have in our daily walk of life, that really could help get you through. And it's functionally strong for a relationship to have that kind of stuff. So I think I would have a really hard time dealing with a significant other who was a desk potato, a workaholic, a sedentary person, all of those things. And I think I would choose just never to even try that one because I don't think it would work for me because I don't do psychotropic drugs, drinking, binge eating, binge TV watching, binge series watching. I've done it, but it's not my default setting to do any of those things I just mentioned. I shouldn't say I've done it. I've done binge TV watching before. I haven't done binge drinking or any heavy duty drugs. But I think the cannabis thing is something that's valid. And if you can get that through exercise and yoga and meditation, great. But if that other stuff, or you don't have time or you don't have interest, and this other one is with your wife and kids and the jobs and the kids and the school and picking them up and going to help your parents out after that and going to volunteer at the school or at the nonprofit, I think that cannabis is one alternative that's worth trying. And if it works, the proof is in the pudding, usually starting in the first hour of that relationship. So over to Nate for his comments.
Thanks, Sifu. And so when you discuss that, I think anytime you can take the anxiousness or anxiety out of a situation is definitely beneficial. I did also go through phases where I'd want to binge watch earlier in my life, binge watch, or maybe overload myself with more negative aspects of sitting around too much. But I always did have that part of me that wanted to move as well. But I've definitely gone through phases where maybe a little bit of depression, a little bit of anxiety, where I would do the opposite and sort of be sedentary. But I knew that wasn't going to be the most beneficial way I could live my life. So that's, hence why I turned back towards exercise. As far as you mentioned the sedentary life again with an office job. I think you can have aspects of that, as long as you have that, going back to that balance where it's like a work hard, play hard type situation, or you can line up your career goals with your endurance slash your physical goals. Where maybe it could be somebody that wants to do their first 5K or first marathon. I think you can use that to boost your career as well, because when others see your work ethic and those across those aspects, it can all be connected. So I know for me, I think back again to high school. I remember, I was getting into smoking cigarettes, drinking with friends in Philadelphia, and I remember something clicked, and I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be more productive. And I remember joining the rowing team, and by joining the rowing team, my grades went up. And just because I was so focused on one thing, it carried over to other aspects. So I think that's one piece of it. And like you said, too, anytime you can, relax yourself, whether it's, through something, an interest you have, or working out, that's fine. As long as it can diffuse the situation and you can get to know each other better. The example of Churchill is interesting. He's another one of those figures in history I've always wanted to meet. Just comes across as very interesting with his quotes. Never give in, I live by. And when you're going through hell, keep going. These are quotes I kind of live by in the endurance sports when you're suffering. But yeah, very interesting guy. Just had to deal with so much during World War II and trying to lead England through that. And I'm sure the amount of pressure and stress he had went through, and just living through that, he must have just been interesting and prevailing through it, so all good points.
Yeah, he was an affluent guy who grew up on an estate, and he got into the government, and he was in the military for quite some time, and then he got into politics and it didn't work out for him. So he was kind of shunned by the political and probably the nobility of England for a while for having gotten taken out of politics. And then he went, I think it was in the 1920s, and got back into the military and did these like Jesse Ventura type things when Jesse was in Buds, just really difficult, death-defying things, and proved himself so that when he came home after 2 years or whatever the duration was of his deployment, he came home as a leader and a survivor and I believe a victor. And I don't think it was the Boer Wars in South Africa. I'll have to look up and see what it was, and I'm not saying I like war or we should kill each other, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying what happened to Churchill. And then he came home, and I think he was now in his 30s at the time, and he had this whole new resurrection, you could say, of people's acceptance. And then he got back into politics, and then he did his thing during World War II, and the Allies won, and he was a big part of that. And he at the end he wrote his memoirs, and he was always a good writer. Now you could read his memoirs, which I don't know how long it took him, but they're extensive. I think if you put them all together, I think they would be something like from my chest to my head. They might be even more. And he was even more prolific than I'm giving him credit for. He just could write, and he could produce those volumes, and he knew everybody, and he met all these people. I'm not saying everything in his works are accurate, true, etc., but he put those stories down, and they're real for people who like that type of history. He's one of the best at it. So he just proved himself in many things in his life. And part of our life is proving ourselves to ourselves, belief in self, and then proving ourselves to the people around us so that we can get into a position that we want to be in. Your thoughts on that, Nate?
So more good points. When you bring up Churchill again, as a leader, um, and being prolific, I definitely agree. Because he was able to also, articulate those thoughts down on paper and speech. Speeches were just great. Just if you YouTube some of his speeches, just you could really rile up, patriotism, I'm sure in England, and just fighting for what the right causes and what they believed in. And like you said, I don't agree with war either. But I, agree he had to defend the country and they had to defend themselves against what was happening in Europe at the time. Thinking back on Churchill, what we talked about earlier, thinking back on Forrest Gump, aspects of this endurance and helping people. I just wanted to kind of end on, I lost a dear friend this past week, but I remember him. His name was Bill Kendall. He was a mentor to me. He was like a leader for me. He emulated his life. One of his quotes was, it just feels good to help other people. And I remember we'd row together in these lifeguard boats at the shore in New Jersey, but we'd have these long life discussions. And where I'm tying in with this is there was an endurance aspect, there was a mentorship aspect, and there was this aspect of helping other people along the way. And that's kind of how I tried to tie in, looking back at these figures in history like Churchill, even pop culture, like we know Forrest Gump isn't real, but just what that figure emulated in society. And it's not only keeping ourselves, our mind and body healthy, but helping others along in the journey. So that's kind of my big takeaway with this discussion and getting into all this, like a healthy mind, body, and spirit, but passing that same message along to others and how they can branch out and help society on a local and a global aspect.
How about the part that I mentioned about your significant other spending those morning hours doing some huffing and puffing out in nature, having breakfast perhaps out in nature, and then getting cleaned up and going to your daily assignment, whether it's family or work or whatever that is, and then seeing each other later on. I mean, it just seems so functional that we didn't have to play catch up because we spent this quality time together. And I know that's high on the list when the psychologists write books about what women want. They like the word quality time with their mate. There's hetero females saying things about hetero males. I'm sure the non-hetero females probably like that quality time also high on their list, but I don't know that. So tell me what you think about that statement and how you were able or unable to do that, and what the results were in your life with your significant others.
So I think it's definitely an advantage or beneficial to any relationship if you can bond, like you're saying, if you can go out and have movement, if you mean like, get dirty and grimy, run, row, climb, hike, do whatever. I think it adds an additional aspect of bonding to the relationship. And then there's more of an interconnection between you. You have more of an understanding. And if you can also have those conversations while you're having that movement, that endorphin rush, I think it comes across as more genuine, and you're both in your own element. You're both in that natural piece, like we said, hunting gathering aspect of our brains, where we're like, okay, these are common things, emotions that tie us together. And I think the movement can definitely increase the relationship. So that's how I look at the aspect. Basically movement is an even greater form of communication, and having that, it solidifies that bond.
And how about times that you couldn't do it and what the results were, and times that you had someone join you on that and you could spend that quality time and what the results were there?
So times that we, like, let's say if I was in a relationship and we couldn't do it together, it is a little bit more challenging to get done a workout and have certain, be in a certain mood where you're like, okay, I can accomplish anything. I just did this workout, and maybe the other person didn't join or wasn't there. It can be a little bit, there can be a resistance going on there, because they might not be thinking as clearly, without that as much mood. Like if they weren't on the same workout, let's say they can go to the gym, etc. So it definitely changes, I think, any human's mindset. But when you can again have that bond, it strengthens it. If you can be on the same page, like even go for, it doesn't have to be anything extreme, like a walk together, maybe hold hands, maybe show nonverbals that, hey, like I agree or disagree. And again, it doesn't always have to be agreement either. It can be a healthy disagreement. Like, let's agree to disagree. But I think having that movement together in any form, swimming, running, walking, and along paired with the conversation is super helpful in any relationship.
Yeah. Wonderful. So do you want to share your profile on the internet so people could find you and follow you if they were so inclined?
Oh yes, thank you. So I'm on Instagram as well as Facebook, and I also am on LinkedIn. It's just Nate, Nate, and then my last name Dirvin, D like Delta, I-R, B like Victor, I-N. Or you can just Google Nate Dirvin, and you can see I have a site to raise money for United States Coast Guard members, Coast Guard mutual assistance. On the site, it lists all the ultra marathons I've completed. I also have a background in rowing, paddling, endurance events, half Ironman I've completed. I'd like to do a full Ironman someday. Just a list of, I have a list of races that I'll be doing in the future. I'm also starting to coach more, just a few clients here and there. And I'm also looking into writing a book, or at least short stories right now, and articles. And I do have one article out. I'm just waiting for it to be released. So,
thanks, Nate. And I'm Sifu Slim at sifuslim.com, author of a few books that are all available via my website, and doing coaching online and doing speaking. So if you have sports teams or other conferences, corporate, whatever it is, and you want to hear some interesting stories and some takeaway messages, you could reach me through my website at sifuslim.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn and all the other Facebook and all the normal things. I'll work on my Instagram, hopefully in the coming year, and try to get that a little bit more enhanced. And so I think this has been wonderful. Nate and I are going to do another one. We wanted to do one today on the junior, raising child athletes and junior athletes, but we took a different path based on our pre-discussion communication. And so we're going to do that one perhaps next time, and see if we can tackle that and give you some more good messages about how to raise your kids with balance in mind. You know, you want to do performance, don't forget balance and joy and movement and recreation and downtime and all these wonderful things, therapy, and teaching kids so that they can carry that rounded out package through the rest of their life, so that there's no, or a lot less fallout, which is what unfortunately we keep seeing with Tiger Woods and a lot of extreme athletes that are hyper focused in one area, not the whole pie chart of what it is to be a human being. So I'm Sifu Slim with Nate Dirvin. Big aloha, Nate, and we'll email, we'll coordinate.
All right. Thank you so much for the interview, Sifu. It was another great experience, and just very eye-opening, and just opening to the mind to hear the different views.
Yes, aloha, and I'll see you out on the trail.
Sounds good. Thank you.